Disclaimer: this video contains spoilers for The Dark Knight Rises. Alright, we got that? Fantastic. Now it's time for Gotham's Reckoning. The Dark Knight had dominated the worldwide box office. It had swept award shows, it had become many people's favorite movie of 2008, and perhaps some people's favorite movie of all time. The deeper themes, the rich and engaging story, the impeccable visuals and spectacle, all of it came together for a thrill ride that audiences wouldn't soon forget, all of which bolstered by an incredible performance by Heath Ledger. So it was no surprise that within weeks of the release of The Dark Knight, calls were immediately made for a sequel, for Christopher Nolan to complete his trilogy of Batman films. Rumors would swirl online following The Dark Knight's release, talking about potential villains, with the two at the forefront being the Riddler and the Penguin. Casting rumors also hit a swell, with names like Johnny Depp and Eddie Murphy for the Riddler, and Philip Seymour Hoffman as the Penguin. The other most speculated character was none other than Catwoman, perhaps one of the most iconic characters across all of Batman comics and movies. Would she be played by Angelina Jolie, or maybe Rachel Weisz? Hell, maybe even Cher will take on the role. Even Megan Fox's name is thrown into the ring following the box office success of Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen. But despite these rumors circulating for the 2 years after The Dark Knight's release, none of them were true, for the simple fact that Christopher Nolan hadn't signed on to even make a third movie. Throughout the remainder of 2008 and the entirety of 2009, the prospect of a third Nolan Batman movie became less and less likely. With every week that passed, there was still no confirmation. Interviews with some of the cast, most notably Christian Bale, shed light on the possibility that Christopher Nolan might not return to complete his trilogy. After all, how could you top The Dark Knight? And it was also no secret that the death of Heath Ledger sent waves across the franchise, given that his character was intended to go on into the third movie in some capacity. While the financial success of The Dark Knight made the prospects for a sequel pretty much inevitable, fans weren't sure if Christopher Nolan or even Christian Bale would return to round out this story. At the very least, fans of Christopher Nolan had his next movie Inception to look forward to, which brought them nice and smoothly into the year 2010. Where finally, after nearly 2 years of silence and rumors, some good news finally came through for Batman fans. While Christopher Nolan was still busy finishing Inception, he would now help usher along an all-new version of Superman, which would reboot the property after Superman Returns. And in exciting news, Nolan confirmed that he'd finally cracked the story for the third Batman film, and was now working on the script with David S. Goyer and his brother Jonathan Nolan, which led to the official announcement of the release date, as Warner Brothers planted the Batman 3 flag on July 20th, 2012. 4 years after the release of The Dark Knight, and still another 2 years away, fans would finally see the continuation they had been clamoring for. But it wasn't just going to be a continuation, as Christopher Nolan revealed in an interview, the third entry would be his last with the Caped Crusader, and it would see the story of this iteration of Batman brought to a close. While the expectation and convention for franchises is that they can go on and on and on, the Nolan Batman films haven't always fallen into those kinds of conventions. Instead, Batman 3 would be the definitive conclusion, and fans were ready to see the story of The Dark Knight finally brought to a close. While details around the third movie were scarce as press for Inception ramped up, there was one thing that Christopher Nolan confirmed: the Joker would not make an appearance in the third installment. The performance by Heath Ledger in The Dark Knight would be able to stand on its own. There would be no recasting, no resurrection of any kind to bring the Joker back in movie 3. Instead, while the third chapter would follow up on the events of The Dark Knight, it'd take on a new villain. With the Riddler rumors still swirling across the internet, even Joseph Gordon-Levitt's name was thrown around as potential casting. While him being cast as the Riddler was nothing more than rumor, fans did know that there were at least some behind-the-scenes conversations about Joseph Gordon-Levitt joining the third movie. Even still, there was no confirmation, nor a role that he was set to play, but there was a role for one of his fellow Inception co-stars, as in October 2010 it was announced that Tom Hardy would take on a significant role in the third installment. While plenty of rumors spread around who exactly he'd play, most of the fan base seemed inclined to agree that he'd be taking on the film's main villain, which all led to the endlessly important question: what what would the third Batman movie be called? Given the title conventions of Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, the third movie could be called any number of things. Gotham City, Gotham Knight, or maybe even just Batman. But none of those suggestions would wind up ringing true, as instead, in October of 2010, after some time had passed and the script for the third Batman movie had gone through some work, Warner Brothers officially announced the title for the third movie as The Dark Knight Rises. The reception to this reveal was a bit mixed. While fans were on one hand very excited to learn some official information directly from Christopher Nolan, others criticized the title for not being all that creative at first glance. They just took the previous movie's title and added another word to the end of it. But this did come with some other reveals at the same time. Namely that unlike most blockbuster movies following the immense success of Avatar, The Dark Knight Rises would not be in 3D. Instead, Christopher Nolan would continue his relationship with IMAX as established with Batman Begins and as flourished with The Dark Knight. And on top of all of that, this reveal also came with the dispelling of one of the foremost rumors about the third movie. Despite all of the fan theories and fan-made posters, Christopher Nolan confirmed that the Riddler would not make an appearance in The Dark Knight Rises, which left the identity of the third movie's main villain a mystery. But it wouldn't be a mystery for much longer, because with the wheels turning and gears grinding on The Dark Knight Rises, casting announcements would start to come through in the early months of 2011. One of the key roles that was rumored to be part of the third installment was a female lead, another love interest following the death of Rachel Dawes in The Dark Knight. There wasn't any confirmation as to which character it'd be exactly, but there were plenty of actresses' names thrown around as potential additions to The Dark Knight Rises cast. Keira Knightley, Blake Lively, Natalie Portman, Naomi Watts, even Rachel Weisz re-entered the conversation. But eventually, the actress that'd take on this role was none other than Anne Hathaway, which also came with the confirmation that she'd take on the latest on-screen rendition of Selina Kyle, also known as Catwoman. The inclusion of Catwoman had been heavily rumored for years, but now it was officially confirmed that she'd take part in the conclusion to Nolan's Batman trilogy. This also came with the confirmation of Tom Hardy's role in the movie, as he would take on the role of the main villain, now confirmed to be Bane. Bane, of course, had appeared on the big screen before in Batman and Robin, but seeing as this whole trilogy is massively different from that movie, fans could only expect that this version of Bane would be something quite different than what they'd seen before. Following this, casting news hit a spike as the months continued, with plenty of names added like Daniel Sunyata and Bern Gorman as newcomers, as well as the return of Nestor Carbonell as Mayor Garcia. But the two most talked about additions were none other than Marion Cotillard, who was heavily rumored to be taking on Talia al Ghul, the daughter of Ra's al Ghul, and once again Joseph Gordon-Levitt re-entered the conversation. There were plenty of roles thrown around that Joseph Gordon-Levitt might take on. A Joker fanatic trying to follow in the original's footsteps? Could he even portray Robin in the upcoming movie? Perhaps Nightwing? Not Batman's sidekick, but a hero in his own right? Eventually, rumors took off that he'd be playing Alberto Falcone, the son of Carmine Falcone, a serial killer villain who would no doubt cause havoc for Batman in the third movie. But those reports were soon proven incorrect, as were the reports of Talia al Ghul's appearance in the movie, as both actors were confirmed to take on all new characters for the new movie. Marion Cotillard would play Miranda Tate, reported as a member of the Wayne Enterprises board, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt would play police officer John Blake. The news that the two actors were playing all new characters was a tiny bit disappointing to fans, especially fans who latched onto the Joseph Gordon-Levitt Robin theories. But there was still a chance, given the endlessly secretive approach that Christopher Nolan employs, that these names were covers for their real identities. Time would have to tell. All of which led to May of 2011, where finally, after nearly 3 years since the release of The Dark Knight, cameras finally began to roll on the third and final chapter, which also coincided with the launch of the viral marketing campaign. A viral marketing campaign that wouldn't be quite as expansive as The Dark Knight, but would still inspire fans around the world to take part in revealing tidbits of information as time went on. First up, fans discovered that the official website TheDarkKnightRises.com was nothing nothing more than a black screen, but a black screen featuring chanting heard in the background. Upon converting this audio into a visual waveform, fans discovered the hashtag #TheFireRises. The hashtag swiftly began to swarm over Twitter, and as it did, each participant's profile picture was placed into a mosaic that slowly revealed the first official look at Bane. Look at that guy right there, just an absolutely massive dude. He had size to him, he had a mask, though not necessarily the mask from the comics. This version of Bane looked immediately terrifying, and sent fans into a frenzy as filming began. Filming first took a turn in England, returning to several locations filmed in Batman Begins, most notably the Nottingham mansion that doubled as Wayne Manor, confirming that this entry would finally see Bruce Wayne make good on his promise of rebuilding Wayne Manor brick by brick. Production would later take a turn to Scotland, and while the story details of the sequence were kept under wraps, it did involve some parachuting stunts and a massive airplane, which sounded quite interesting. But enough of the tiny tidbits and small peaks of information. Once the clock turned to July 2011, an entire year out from release, Warner Brothers decided it was time to kick off the marketing for The Dark Knight Rises. Like the two movies before it, this third entry was going to get the word out about its release as soon as possible, which all kicked off with this teaser poster, showing the bat symbol not highlighted in the sky, but rather made up from torn skyscrapers in Gotham, promising that this third entry might be more apocalyptic than either of the previous two. Or it's just a cool way to say Batman 3 is coming out in 2012. Get ready. But this teaser poster wasn't all, because playing in front of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2 in theaters, Warner Brothers released the first ever teaser trailer for The Dark Knight Rises.
If you make yourself more than just a man, if you devote yourself to an ideal, then you become something else entirely.
Given that the movie is still a year out at this point, there isn't a whole lot of new footage to show off. In fact, a large portion of this 90-second teaser features footage from the previous two movies. But there are brief glimpses of the new story to come, particularly with a brief monologue from a bedridden Jim Gordon who says, quite plainly, that the Batman has to come back. This sent the internet aflame. It seemed following the end of The Dark Knight, the Batman vanished, and now with a new plot on the horizon, it was time for the Caped Crusader to return for one final mission. The Dark Knight had to rise, which leads to a very brief glimpse of this movie's villain right at the very end, Bane. There wasn't much, but it was one of the first tangible pieces of marketing that fans were able to get their hands on. They had seen a glimpse of what promised to be an epic conclusion. As the summer continued and production moved swiftly along, this third entry took a bit of a deviation from its predecessors. While both Batman Begins and The Dark Knight used Chicago to create the fictionalized Gotham City, The Dark Knight Rises wasn't going to make a turn to the Windy City this time around. Instead, production landed in Pittsburgh, both for a fictional football game as well as a massive clash in the city streets, photos of which managed to land online, coupled with the first official look at Catwoman on the Batpod, giving fans their first clear look at this iteration of the iconic character. But Pittsburgh wouldn't be the only city that'd fill in for Gotham, as The Dark Knight Rises eventually took its production to Los Angeles during the months of September and October, where plenty more set photos managed to get out. Some were of relatively nondescript scenes, but one piece of information got out that was very exciting for Batman fans. The Dark Knight Rises was going to feature the Batwing. Batman was actually going to fly around this time. We've had the Tumbler, we've had the Batpod, now it's time for a new toy. A massive flying machine to change up the action all over again. And finally, at the end of October, the production took a turn to New York City, filming across the city to round out this all-new Gotham. But it also gave gave fans an all-new look at the Batwing, which was now confirmed to not really be a Batwing, more a Batcopter, as it was reported that propellers were going to be added in post via CGI. And everything came to a head in November 2011 with an enormous clash of police officers and reportedly escaped Arkham inmates. Regardless of what story the third entry was going to tell, it was clear that it would feature an immense scale finale unlike anything seen in the previous two movies. Not only would Batman and Bane clash, but there would be a literal fight for Gotham, and fans could not be more excited. All of which led to the end of production, as the shoot finally wrapped and cameras were put away for the last time, bringing the production on all three Nolan Batman movies to a close. But that didn't mean the steady outpouring of news was going to stop. Quite the opposite. With production now concluded, press and promotion surrounding the movie increased in the final 2 months of the year. Empire magazine got the biggest scoop in November as production wrapped, featuring all new official images, the best looks yet at Bane and Batman, as well as some hints towards the story. Perhaps most shocking of all was that Christopher Nolan revealed that this third entry would take place 8 years after the events of The Dark Knight, which also helped bolster the July teaser. Batman's been gone for quite some time, and now he has to come back. But that was merely a prelude, because once the clock turned to December 2011, promotion hit a massive stride. Fans only had set photos and that 90-second July teaser to go off of at this point, but now they were going to get a lot more to chew on, and in ways that followed in the footsteps of The Dark Knight. Because, like the second movie, The Dark Knight Rises would also reveal a 6-minute prologue in front of IMAX showings of Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. This also coincided with the reveal of this image that was sent out to publications, used as part of the viral marketing campaign to introduce Dr. Leonid Pavel, who was said to have some kind of significant role in the third movie's story, and especially this IMAX prologue. And if this prologue is anything like the Joker bank heist from The Dark Knight, this is surely to be another massively exciting sequence. Let's check it out. Like The Dark Knight opening before it, this prologue mainly serves to introduce us to this movie's main villain, Bane, in a scene where he is captured by a CIA agent but ultimately escapes through this massive show of practical effects and breathtaking IMAX imagery. Christopher Nolan's promise to make something grander in scope was completely fulfilled even in this one single scene. If there was any doubt that he could top The Dark Knight, all of that swiftly washed away. The scale, the intensity, the music, everything came together for this thrilling opener. But unlike the Dark Knight prologue before it, this scene brought out one pretty significant caveat among critics and audiences. They couldn't understand what the hell Bane was saying. It was clear that Christopher Nolan and Tom Hardy had gone to great lengths to create a voice for Bane, and while the sound mix was likely unfinished at this point, the Bane dialogue was largely unintelligible. You kinda had to strain yourself to hear it properly.
If I pull that off, will you die?
It would be extremely painful.
This criticism echoed across the internet, ultimately resulting in the infamous Bane posting that'd follow, with people quoting the lines from the opening scene all in an effort to make fun of it, which was kind of funny at times. But overall, the spectacle and scale of the opening scene was enough to get fans excited. But what about the people who weren't able to journey to IMAX theaters to see the prologue? Well, have no fear, because right after this, audiences were treated to this all-new teaser poster for The Dark Knight Rises, featuring Bane walking through the rain away from a broken Batman mask. Batman was going to go through the ringer this time, which all led to December 19th, 2011, where Warner Brothers released an all-new trailer for one of the most anticipated movies of 2012.
There's a storm coming, Mr. Wayne. You and your friends better batten down the hatches. Because when it hits, you're all gonna wonder how you ever thought you could live so large and leave so little for the rest of us.
Across a monstrous 2 minutes, this trailer shows off spectacle and scale unlike anything seen in this trilogy before. The story looked huge, Bane's plan looked immense, all bolstered by a scene where he blows up an entire football field. Just an insane combination of practical and visual effects on display. Combine it with a montage of nondescript action shots, and it was clear that The Dark Knight Rises was going to be one of the biggest events of the coming year. The Dark Knight might have made the prospects of a sequel immensely difficult, but this looked like it was going to live up to the insane expectations. The Dark Knight Rises was on its way. The third and final Nolan Batman movie was on its way. And while there was still a 7-month wait before release, audiences were already counting down until the day that the legend would end. The early months of 2012 were relatively quiet, especially in comparison to the densely packed December promotion. There were the occasional drops of new official images, an Entertainment Weekly 2012 preview issue detailing some new stuff, but overall, Batman fans hit a bit of a dry spell. They caught glimpses of toys, the occasional interview, as well as continuing reports following the debut of the IMAX Prologue, with plenty of sources saying that Warner Brothers was freaking out a little bit that no one could understand what Bane was saying. The other common thread was that this movie, more than either of the previous movies, was hell-bent on maintaining its secrets, to maintain the surprise for the audience as much as possible before they sat down in theaters in July. But after a bit of a dry spell, promotion once again started to heat up in April 2012. More images were revealed, and Christopher Nolan even made an appearance at CinemaCon in Las Vegas, showing off all new footage to attendees. While the footage was never made public, descriptions made their way online, with one particular bit of insight. Bane sounded a bit more intelligible this time around, but all of that was merely a precursor, as at the end of the month, Warner Brothers re-entered the game. Just before the release of the other most anticipated movie of the year, The Avengers, hit theaters, Warner Brothers released an all-new trailer for The Dark Knight Rises. But it wasn't the most conventional release, as the trailer would be revealed through the latest leg of the viral marketing campaign. Things kicked off on the darkknightrises.com, which revealed this wanted image of Batman, an image that wound up leading to clues placed across the world of Batman graffiti in reportedly 300 cities all over the globe. Fans scoured the world to find these pieces of Batman graffiti, and with every one that was discovered, they'd find a single frame of the newest trailer. And so, after painstaking work by fans who were more eager than ever for this final installment, they finally managed to find every piece of graffiti and unlock every single frame of the new trailer, which meant they could now view this all-new trailer in its full glory.
There's a storm coming.
You sound like you're looking forward to it.
I'm adaptable.
Things start off slow and ominous, with barely any sound, only a slight piano note every few seconds as we are slowly but surely reintroduced to this world. Things build and build as the trailer promises a terrifying Bane, a Gotham brought to its knees, with bridges destroyed in a flash. This trailer is all about escalation, how things are not just bigger than both previous movies, but how things start small and get more bombastic and more intense even within these 2 minutes.
You don't owe these people anymore. You've given them everything.
Not everything. Not yet.
All of which leads into a final montage of incredible action, special effects, just tons and tons of great imagery that is sure to get fans more excited than ever for what promises to be a massive and thrilling conclusion.
My mother warned me about getting into cars with strange men.
This isn't a car.
Marketing skyrocketed after this. With the Avengers in theaters, The Dark Knight Rises quickly became the next biggest thing to take over the summer movie season. Posters released showing the bleak tone, as well as highlighting the three major characters Batman, Catwoman, and Bane. TV spots crowded the airwaves with tons of fun glimpses, moments, all sorts of great imagery to keep fans engaged in the final weeks. Billboards were seen across the world showing the massive scale that this finale was going to bring. Even in the final weeks, a fourth trailer hit the internet, featuring even more footage and more action for fans to chew on as they were now able to buy their tickets to experience the ending once and for all. The Dark Knight Rises was one of, if not the most anticipated movie of the year for a great many people, and its release was an event unlike any other. It was even announced before the release that some theaters would show a Trilogy marathon, featuring showings of Batman Begins and The Dark Knight before the midnight unveiling of The Dark Knight Rises to bring everything to a close. Anticipation was at a level that had never before been seen. Batman had once again taken over the world, and audiences were ready to see his concluding adventure. It's been 4 years since the groundbreaking release of The Dark Knight, and now, after years of rumors, speculation, after a massive worldwide production, after the trailers teased a story far grander than either of the previous movies, the time had finally come. The Dark Knight Rises was here. Theaters were being filled to the brim as audiences geared up one last time for the conclusion of Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy. The clock had finally turned to July 20th, 2012. It was once again time to grab some popcorn, take a seat, and experience this last chapter in the Caped Crusader's journey. It was now time for The Dark Knight Rises.
I knew Harvey Dent. I was his friend.
Things kick off as promised with the IMAX sequence that introduces us to Bane. The whole scene that was shown in December 2011 is here. Every moment, every line, every piece of action. The spectacle is on full display once again. But there is one key difference between the scene now and the scene in December, and that difference is the voice of Bane. Criticism spurred from the original IMAX showing that his voice was unintelligible, but now, 8 months later, it seems that his voice is intelligible. Audiences could finally hear what he was saying. But this also came with a caveat. The monkey's paw finger curls at this moment, because while Bane is easier to understand, the vocal performance is also heightened a little bit. The accent is largely the same, but the cadence is a tiny bit different. The delivery is a tiny bit different. And when you line up some of these lines side by side with how they were performed in December, you can really hear the difference. This moment in particular sounds quite a bit different between December 2011 and July 2012.
Was getting caught part of your plan?
Of course.
Was getting caught part of your plan?
Of course.
The other thing is that the audio mixing on the voice is really weird now. If you have a surround sound system, or if you heard it in the movie theater, it kinda sounds like the voice is coming exclusively from the back speakers, nothing from the front. It makes the voice sound separate from the rest of what's happening on screen. It winds up creating this truly bizarre experience. We know intellectually that Bane is the one talking, but it doesn't really sound like the voice is coming from him. It's clear that the voice was changed following the release of the IMAX Prologue in December, and the voice that we're left with is one that is far more fun to imitate and make light of. I mean, there are tons of lines here that are pretty funny, even if not intentionally.
You're a big guy.
For you.
Which begs the important question. If the original voice were to have stuck around, would it have worked better? Perhaps it wouldn't have been as intelligible, but it might have also held more menace to it. These are the kinds of things we'll likely never know, but they're the kinds of things that are fun to think about. These what-if questions about these movies. But that is merely the opening scene, and once it's all wrapped up, audiences were able to finally witness the entirety of The Dark Knight Rises. And over the course of its sizable 2-hour, 44-minute runtime, audiences would soon learn that this movie isn't quite as good as its predecessor. The Dark Knight Rises is still an immensely entertaining movie with tons of great moments and plenty of genuinely good scenes. But there are little chinks and cracks in the armor the whole way through that wind up taking points off the board. A lot of those things matter very little on their own, but when added up, it creates a very unique movie that is most definitely attempting to be as good as The Dark Knight, but falls short in several ways. There are little logic gaps, little story beats that don't quite connect. There's also a chief difference in approach between this movie and its two predecessors. Christopher Nolan has always been a filmmaker who loves his puzzles, and he loves making movies that feel like puzzles. But the two Batman movies before this are notable exceptions in a way. Batman Begins might have had some out-of-order scenes in the first act, but most of that movie plays out linearly. The Dark Knight especially might be Christopher Nolan's most traditionally structured movie, but it works those traditions fantastically well. Dark Knight Rises, however, imbues some more of that puzzle idea, but sometimes fails to wrap it around the drama and characters within the story. There are plenty of stretches that are overloaded purely by information, just unfolding new stuff that the audience is attempting to wrap their head around, but without much story to glom onto. The Dark Knight was also overloaded with information at every turn, but it always served a purpose and always gave Batman a specific goal to accomplish, be it the scene where Harvey and Rachel are hooked up to bombs, the destruction of the hospital, and especially with the two boats. But that kind of stuff isn't really present here. Despite the fact that The Dark Knight Rises isn't quite as thrilling as its predecessor though, it's still a largely entertaining ride, and the compounding of little things makes this movie equally as interesting as The Dark Knight for very different reasons. 8 years have passed since The Dark Knight. Gotham is a far more peaceful city. The war against the mob came to a close thanks to the Dent Act, enacted in the name of one Harvey Dent. The Batman has vanished, as has billionaire Bruce Wayne, but I'm sure that's just a coincidence. Commissioner Gordon, of course, was present during the death of Harvey Dent. He knows the truth about him and helped concoct the lie that Gotham is currently functioning off of. And while he has written a speech detailing the entire history and the truth about Harvey Dent, he decides to hold on to that for the time being, to let Gotham celebrate for a little while longer. We got a bunch of new characters as well. Officer John Blake is patrolling the city's streets, Miranda Tate is a member of the Wayne Enterprises board, and a partial funder for a Wayne Enterprises Save the World project, which, as it's revealed, is a nuclear reactor built underneath Gotham as a means of clean energy. At least that was the idea. Ultimately, the reactor just kinda sits here, draining money from Wayne Enterprises year by year. But the peace the city has been experiencing is soon to come to a close, as Bane has arrived in Gotham, triggering the entire series of events that follow. And Bane is huge. I mean, the dude is just massive. In this one scene, we see the scale of this guy, and how much Tom Hardy bulked up to play the character. Despite that, though, this particular villain ultimately fails to live up to the Joker. But that's almost an unfair comparison considering how fantastic the Joker was. But even still, Bane feels more like a collection of ideas that were put together in lieu of a crystallized character that embodies the themes of the story. A lot of this isn't helped by the fact that despite the movie unloading information about him in so many scenes, it deliberately hides perhaps the most important information until the very end, leaving Bane something of a mystery that you're unable to put together. We are told, however, that Bane was once a member of the League of Shadows. In a pretty significant way, Bane is given a strong connection to Ra's al Ghul, the villain of the first movie. In fact, he was excommunicated by Ra's al Ghul. That's gotta say something.
And any man who is too extreme for Ra's al Ghul is not to be trifled with.
Now, despite his shortcomings, however, Bane is still really entertaining, if maybe for the wrong reasons. The weird separated voice gives him such a unique presence in the movie, and heightens every one of his lines.
I'm in charge.
Do you feel in charge?
Bane's arrival in Gotham winds up sparking the entire story that follows, as his arrival winds up putting Jim Gordon into the hospital, an event that finally gets the lone Bruce Wayne back into action. Not necessarily as the Caped Crusader, but at least as something that'll get him out of the house, which is where he meets potentially the strongest new addition to the cast, Selina Kyle, Catwoman herself. She is probably the most fun character in the entire movie, which is a bit of a statement in a relatively grim movie movie like this. She stands out from the crowd because she's a character that is actually having fun. It's kind of nuts.
It's just very playful and a lot of fun. That's really what she's doing in the film. You know, the film has a lot of miserable people in it, frankly, and she's not one of them.
Couple it with fantastic thieving skills, some serrated blades on her heels, and you have yourself a femme fatale that will definitely prove fatal to you if you make a wrong move. And she's got a great musical theme as well, just a soft little piano tune that carries a sense of whimsy and mischief to it. It's a theme that fully embodies the character whilst also carrying a very different sound than either of the previous two scores. In fact, a lot of the score this time around sounds quite different than the first two. This is in part due to the all-new characters and the attempt to create an all-new sound for this third installment so as not to just copy what happened last time, but it's also due to the fact that this score wasn't a partnership. This score was done entirely by Hans Zimmer. James Newton Howard was part of the scores for the first two movies, but after Hans Zimmer went solo for Inception, Howard felt that he'd be a third wheel going into Batman 3. So Hans Zimmer is on his own to create the musical sound that both harkens back to the first two movies, as well as create tons and tons of new themes for this movie, its story, and its thematic ideas. Then of course we have Bruce Wayne, a character stuck in a rut after the events of The Dark Knight. The years haven't been all that kind to him. His leg is fractured, he needs a walking stick, he's hobbling around his house with a scruffy beard. Bruce Wayne is trapped in a moment from 8 years past, still hung up on the death of Rachel Dawes, believing that she and him were going to get together again until their fates turn sour. And as this movie begins, Bruce Wayne, quite frankly, doesn't have the will to live, something that Alfred makes perfectly clear.
But that's all part of living, sir. But you're not living, you're just waiting, hoping for things to go bad again.
Which even comes with a scene in which Alfred talks about a yearly visit to a cafe in Florence, Italy, during the years in which Bruce Wayne was in self-imposed exile before becoming Batman. Every time Alfred went to this cafe, he hoped that he'd find Bruce Wayne sitting at another table, that he had found a life.
You wouldn't say anything to me, nor me to you. But we both know that you'd made it, that you were happy.
This entire character journey is at the center of this movie. Bruce Wayne has no will to live, which is why when Bane begins to surface and things start to go downhill, he gets himself back up to don the cape and cowl once again.
You're afraid that if I go back out there, I'll fail.
I'm afraid that you want to.
Which all leads to one of the big turning points in the story, where Bane finally makes his appearance at a stock exchange, attacking the people inside, getting into the computers for some nefarious purpose, and ultimately escaping with hostages to cover himself from police shooting. It's a pretty brisk sequence, and something far more high stakes than Gotham's seen in a long time, which leads to the moment that no one in the movie is expecting, but everyone in the audience has been waiting for. Because now, after a whopping 45 minutes, this movie finally sees the return of Batman. And for the next few minutes, the movie kicks everything into gear. This moment marks not just the return of Batman, but the full return of the Batman Begins action theme. The pulsating score blares over the scene as Batman races through the city streets. Police officers are slowly but surely made aware of his sudden comeback. The chase is plastered over the news, exciting the still bedridden Jim Gordon. Couple it with great images like the entire police force of Gotham closing in on him. I mean, there are so many cop cars bearing down on Batman. The scale of it is huge. And then of course you have the ultimate introduction of Batman's latest vehicle, the Bat, which comes out in one of the most awe-inspiring ways possible. The Bat is just so cool, and it's presented with such awe and wonder that's rare to find in these movies, but it's honestly refreshing. Too bad the autopilot doesn't work, as Lucius Fox makes clear to Bruce Wayne. But hey, this thing is cool regardless, as is this entire scene. It's genuinely one of the most exciting parts of the movie, and it's a full return to form. After 4 years since the last movie, the wait was worth it. Batman was back. Didn't mean Alfred was going to stick around for it though, leading to this really heartbreaking scene and a great performance from Michael Caine, where he just lets it all out. Alfred's frustrations with this whole crusade have been pretty well vocalized in this movie up to this point, but this is the inflection point. Now that Batman is back out there, Alfred can't take it anymore, and it's where he finally reveals to Bruce the contents of that letter he burned all those years ago. That Rachel Dawes was never ultimately going to wind up with Bruce Wayne, that she had already chosen to stick with Harvey Dent before she died. It's one of the best little scenes in the movie, and it also works as a very unexpected payoff to the whole letter idea left hanging after the last movie, bolstered by a truly excellent performance by Michael Caine.
It means your hatred, and it also means losing someone that I have cared for since I first heard his cries echo through this house.
As it turns out though, the hit at the stock exchange wasn't for no reason at all. At the start of the movie, Selina Kyle managed to get Bruce Wayne's fingerprints, sell them to this guy, who then transferred them over to Bane to get access to Wayne's stocks. Bane then threw all of those stocks into the Bleeding Energy Project, essentially making Bruce Wayne broke. This movie has a little bit on its mind when it comes to the rich and the powerful in the world. Bruce Wayne is obviously torn down from his decadence, but even then he's able to keep his big mansion.
The rich don't even go broke the same as the rest of us, huh?
There's also a clear disdain for the elites from the villains, with Bane especially not taking kindly to anyone at the stock exchange.
There's no money you could steal.
Really? Now why are you people here?
Bane's plan ultimately is to bankrupt Bruce Wayne so that John Daggett can take control of the company and the nuclear reactor. But since Bruce Wayne and Lucius Fox are wise to that, they instead transfer control over to Miranda Tate, keeping the reactor away from Bane's hands, which means it's time for a strike against Bane, leading to a big team-up between Batman and Catwoman. The action heats up once again as the two head into the sewers, slowly making their way closer and closer towards Bane's headquarters, with plenty of fun little moments and lines here and there to keep the scene exciting. Which leads to a one-on-one confrontation between Batman and Bane. I find it a wise change of pace from the previous movie to make the villain of this one a physical opponent to Batman as well as a psychological foe. The Joker is a fantastic villain in The Dark Knight, but you pit him in a fist fight against Batman? Pfft. Nah, Batman wins every time, which is why that movie leans so hard into the psychological and ideological battle between the two, which is also endlessly thrilling. But in this movie, the filmmakers made the wise decision to try and avoid any comparisons or any moment that might retread ground by picking a villain who could not only hold up to Batman, but outmatch him. Bane is strong as hell here, and this entire sequence sees him beating down on Batman without remorse. You feel every punch, every kick. The sound design has tons and tons of impact. Couple it with the fantastic set with waterfalls all over the place, and you have yourself a pretty thrilling and harrowing sequence. Because the longer it goes on, the more Bane whittles down Batman more and more, until reaching a moment where he breaks Batman's mask through pure force. But that's only part of what Bane does here, because ultimately, to close out this sequence, this movie recreates one of the most famous Bane stories around, the one in which he famously breaks Batman.
I was wondering what would break first. Your spirit or your body?
Way to make Bane feel physically formidable. He beats Batman, he breaks Batman, leaving him defenseless, leaving him completely incapable of fighting back. And ultimately, Bane throws him into a pit, a prison on the other side of the world, a prison in which the only way out is through a massive climb to the surface. It's a harrowing moment for Bruce Wayne, as Bane realizes that Bruce has no will to live, and decides that, as he puts it,
your punishment must be more severe when it is done, and Gotham is ashes. Then you have my permission to die.
But as harrowing as this is, there's also a bit of a sinking feeling with all of this. We spent the first 45 minutes of the movie slowly rebuilding Bruce Wayne so that he'd be fit to return as Batman, and now we're going to do that all over again in the same movie. Sounds a little repetitive to me, doing the same rebuilding storyline twice? Maybe I should start being repetitive. They're gonna do the Bruce Wayne rebuilds himself into Batman story a second time in the same movie, yet you get it. All of which leads into the biggest turning point of the entire story. With Batman out of the picture and Bane finally revealed to the Gotham police force, it's time for them to take action. Every available cop in the city is sent down into the sewers to finally take Bane down. 3,000 men sent down all at once. If only it wasn't a trap. That's right, this all falls directly into Bane's favor. He has taken control of the nuclear reactor, he's turned it into a nuclear bomb and separated it from the core, and now he's going to use it to liberate Gotham City. Which leads to the moment when Bane finally reveals his entire game plan. That bombs have been baked into the concrete across the city, and all of them are detonated at once, trapping the police officers in the sewers. The bridges around Gotham are destroyed, preventing anyone from being able to escape. And finally, a football field, actively in the midst of a game, is destroyed. Which also results in the death of Mayor Garcia. In one fell swoop, Gotham is suddenly under Bane's control, and it's accomplished with a pretty spectacular effect. I mean, the explosion to destroy the football field is mostly CGI, but it's bolstered by practical dirt puffs and stuntmen falling into pre-built holes in the ground. It's a combination of factors that leads to a genuinely fantastic visual moment. There are a couple logic gaps with the whole affair, because it's not necessarily the smartest tactical move to send every Gotham cop into the sewers, which is made abundantly clear now that they're all trapped. Like, good going on that one, Gordon. But now, the city is under Bane's control. The place is under threat of a nuclear bomb, the only man who's able to disarm it is dead, and the trigger is somewhere in the city with an unknown Gotham citizen.
And at the first sign of interference from the outside world, or from those people attempting to flee, this anonymous Gothamite, this unsung hero, will trigger the bomb.
The whole second half of this movie now sees Gotham completely changed due to this event. Bane has lifted the systems of the city in an effort of liberation, which also brings up some interesting thematic questions, or rather, one question in particular. Can a peaceful civilization be built on a foundation of lies? This is of course in reference to the lie surrounding Harvey Dent. His acts in the last movie were kept hidden from Gotham, and Batman wound up taking the fall. But now, thanks to Gordon's speech that Bane now has possession of, he reveals the truth. Harvey Dent killed those people. Batman stopped him from killing Gordon's son, and concocted a lie to try and better Gotham City. But as interesting as it is to see the truth about Harvey Dent finally revealed, there isn't much made of this long term. In fact, this is the last time in the entire movie that Harvey Dent is mentioned by name or even referred to. Not only was the Dent Act rather vague at the start of the movie, it just kind of magically puts the right people behind bars, but now we don't really get to see people piecing together what this means for Batman in particular. It'd be nice to see some civilians, or especially some of the cops chasing Batman earlier, realizing that they were completely wrong about him. It'd follow through on one of the hardest hitting lines of The Dark Knight, making Batman both the hero Gotham deserves and the one it needs right now. But that aspect isn't really explored, which is a little underwhelming. At the same time, Bane's entire modus operandi feels a little confused. I'm not necessarily confused about it, but it feels like the movie is. Bane has this whole speech about liberating the people of Gotham, about ripping the rich and the powerful away from their decadence. We've seen plenty of lines that have criticized the rich and powerful in Gotham, and Bane here seems to want to tear all of that away and level the playing field for the entire city, which would ultimately lead to a domino effect that'd change all of Western civilization.
Gotham is yours. None shall interfere. Do as you please.
All of that is perfectly fine on its own, but it's clouded by the fact that the nuclear bomb that Bane is using to shock Gotham into liberation is actually a time bomb. Since it's been disconnected from the reactor, it will slowly deteriorate until it explodes, destroying Gotham City regardless of what happens inside. So, what does Bane want exactly? Does he want liberation, or does he want total destruction? In a speech to Bruce Wayne in the pit, he made it sound like he wanted to make Gotham feel like there could be hope, that they could survive, only for the bomb to go off anyway. All of these disparate pieces wind up clouding Bane as a character. He lacks the thematic through line that made the Joker so thrilling. It's just one of the things that, despite the performance, the design, the whole approach to the character, he just falls short in the convolution of the movie's story. Despite that, he has turned Gotham on its head. The entire system that the city is built on has been changed. There are now sentencing hearings being conducted with none other than Jonathan Crane as the judge. Now that's fun, giving Cillian Murphy an appearance in all 3 of these movies, with a couple good little moments on his massive throne of a desk.
Exile or death?
Exile.
Sold.
And now Jim Gordon and John Blake are 2 of the only cops left inside to try and fight Bane from within, to try and save Gotham before it is destroyed by nuclear fire. It's an exciting prospect and something just absolutely massive in scope. The use of Los Angeles, Pittsburgh, and New York as Gotham here winds up serving in this movie's favor. It's a very different city now, especially under Bane's rule, and using locations that are different from the first 2 movies illustrates that pretty well, even if the continuity head in me is a little miffed that Gotham is just a different city in this movie. However, there is a brief glimpse of the train from Batman Begins at one point, so there is that. Now, you might be asking, while Bane is taking over Gotham, what is Bruce Wayne up to? Well, Bruce Wayne is able to watch all of this because they got CNN down in that pit, which is pretty sick, honestly. They got great reception down there. But as discussed, Bruce Wayne is going to go through the same journey once again. But despite the repetition, this is actually where his character arc and the entire central idea of the movie is crystallized. Despite the movie's flaws, the central story of Bruce Wayne is one of its strongest aspects, if not the strongest aspect entirely, and this sequence is where the main thematic idea of his character really takes hold. After being beaten by Bane, Bruce Wayne gets his back corrected, all in an effort to make the climb out of the pit to reach the surface and return to Gotham. Has anyone else managed to escape? Well, there was one. A child, who as it's revealed is the child of Ra's al Ghul. And with the information Bruce Wayne knows up to this point, he believes that this child is Bane himself. So he makes it his mission to climb to the top, to make this incredibly difficult jump. But in his first 2 attempts, he fails. But why?
Fear is why you fail.
No, I'm not afraid. I'm angry.
But what Bruce Wayne doesn't realize is that it's his lack of fear that's holding him back. He lacks the fear of death. And this is where he must get it back. If Bruce Wayne is to escape the prison, he must regain the will to live. For the last 8 years, he's been trapped in a single moment, unable to escape. But because of the information that he learns in this story and the challenge placed before him to escape, he is put through his ultimate test. He must regain his fear of death in order to survive. After all, the child that escaped all those years ago escaped without using the safety rope. Just a free climb, with no guarantee of survival.
Then make the climb as the child is. Without the rope, then fear will find you again.
Which all leads to this rousing scene, featuring excellent music by Hans Zimmer, as Bruce Wayne once again makes the climb without the rope. He slowly rises to the jump as the crowd chants from below, chanting the same motif heard in Bane's theme, a chant that is revealed to simply mean, rise. Bruce reaches the jump, he reaches the most challenging part of the whole thing, he takes a deep breath, and finally... the fear of death found him again. The will to live found him again. And he slowly makes his way out of the pit. This moment solidifies the entire point of his journey in this story, and the entire central theme of the movie. As the heroic Batman theme blares through the speakers, we finally put it together. This is the moment that the Dark Knight rises. Which then transitions quite nicely into a section of the movie I like to call the logic gap. As things begin to gear up for the finale, there are a couple leaps that are made to put pieces into their proper place. Leaps that aren't necessarily problems with the story, but given how attentive all three of these movies are to the details, there are moments here that stick out like a sore thumb because they don't feature a lot of those details. And they all manifest into a couple of key questions like, how the hell does Bruce Wayne get back into Gotham? I mean, the movie's gone to great lengths to ensure that no one is getting in or out lest the bomb go off, but here he is. Bruce Wayne's back. I guess he climbed over that pile of cars when no one was looking. The other moment comes with the final resurgence of the Batman, because it's here that after Bruce Wayne has gotten his tech back together, he's formulated a plan to stop Bane, he finally reunites with Gordon, who lights up a flare and ignites a big bat symbol on a bridge.
Impossible.
Which begs the question, when did Bruce Wayne have time to set that up? I mean, the whole city is under a ticking clock. The bomb's gonna go off in less than 12 hours. So why did Bruce Wayne spend painstaking time setting all of this up? Again, these are not questions that really cause problems with the story. In fact, this moment in particular is pretty neat, and it wouldn't be out of place in the Tim Burton Batman movies. But given the tone and sensibilities of these movies, moments like this wind up sticking out. But regardless of these logic gaps, everything is now coming to a head. Everything in this movie has now led to this ultimate climax. With Batman's help, John Blake has finally freed the police officers buried underground. Jim Gordon is on his way to stop the signal of the detonator from getting to the bomb itself, to prevent an early detonation. Selina Kyle has busted open the tunnel to allow people to escape, and she even considers escaping herself. And John Blake is entrusted to help lead people out of the city in case Batman and Gordon ultimately fail to stop the bomb. Which leads to by far the biggest set piece of the entire trilogy. An army of police officers versus an army of Bane's goons. They clash in the city streets in these massive sweeping shots, and in the middle of it all, Batman and Bane are found going face to face once again.
So you came back to die with your city?
I came back to stop you.
Batman, you didn't have to say that out loud, really. Like, we kinda got it. You can just get into the punching. But that's alright. But as exciting as all of this is, it's also the moment where the entire modus operandi of the villains winds up falling apart. Because after all of the information that we've gotten about the child that escaped the pit, Ra's al Ghul's child, it's revealed that Batman was wrong about the child's identity. Bane is not the child of Ra's al Ghul. As many fans predicted, the Miranda Tate identity was a cover for Talia al Ghul. Turns out it was a cover within the movie itself as well, leaving Talia to be the surprise main villain for the final stretch of the movie. Which I can't help but feel that takes the air out of a lot of what Bane was doing. Things have already been a little confused with Bane's ultimate goals for Gotham, but this is really where it all crumbles. I mean, on a logistical side, it makes sense. All of that information was in place, and the reveal comes through and it works technically, and I'm also not even remotely saying that I could do any better. But this reveal doesn't so much clarify all the information we've gotten up to this point, but instead it just raises more questions. Bane's whole character is really put through the ringer because of it, given that this reveal almost makes him an entirely different character. That's not just saying that we can look at him in a new light, but more that I can't really draw a line between the Protector in the pit and the Bane we've seen in Gotham. I can't help but wonder if this movie might have been better served if Bane was purely his own villain, instead of being so intrinsically connected to Ra's al Ghul. I get the instinct to tie things back to the first movie, but it ultimately confuses Bane's whole deal, and makes him second fiddle to Talia. And given how late this whole reveal is, Talia's whole deal is super rushed because the movie has to get moving towards the climax. So the unloading of information has to be laced in with her motivation. Not to mention, she feels like a different character now, which kinda makes it feel like the movie has introduced its main villain over 2 hours into the final movie in the trilogy. Maybe it would have been better if this information was revealed earlier, if Bane's specific motivations were revealed earlier instead of being obfuscated, or maybe it would have been better if he was his own guy. Who really knows? Regardless, this is the twist the movie went with. And it's not like it goes much farther for Bane because With Bane suddenly out of the picture, it leaves Talia al Ghul as the main villain for the final set piece of the movie, as every player races around Gotham to chase the nuclear bomb. And it is the most bombastic and massive sequence in the entire trilogy. Any pretense is almost completely thrown out the window. This is the ultimate stand, and this movie knows it. It's also one of, if not the most thrilling sequence of the movie, because for one of the only points in the movie, this sequence gives the heroes a specific goal: to get to the nuclear bomb, to reconnect it to the reactor, to save the city, featuring even more moments of the Bat-Pod's wheels spinning sideways, which is always so sick. Batman is flying around in the Bat, outrunning missiles which collide with the biggest towers across the city. At the same time, Lucius Fox is at the reactor getting it ready so that Batman and Catwoman can reconnect the bomb and stop the detonation. John Blake is at the only remaining bridge trying to lead people out of the city in case the bomb goes off anyway. And during this entire set piece there are tons of visual effects on display here, but they're also all combined with incredible practical effects as well, with carts and cables towing around the Bat to give it the illusion of flight. But like both previous movies, Christopher Nolan once again applies the trick of you can have as many fake or fantastical shots as you want in the sequence so long as the final punchline is entirely real. And once again, Christopher Nolan comes through for the final moment of this massive action sequence. Yep, that was done entirely practically, and it looks incredible. But it is followed up by a really awkward death sequence. Suffering from the injuries of the crash, Talia winds up succumbing to her wounds rather suddenly. That scene became one of heavy ridicule following the movie's release. But this is where everything reaches a head. While our hero's plan was to reconnect the core with the reactor, stabilizing it and preventing the explosion, it's revealed that Talia set the reactor to be flooded, completely removing that option from the equation. To make matters worse, the last remaining bridge has been destroyed, trapping the people of Gotham, preventing their escape. Which means there is only one option left to save the city. Someone must take the bomb as far away as possible so that it can detonate at a safe distance. But to do that, someone has to be at ground zero, which leads to the moment where Batman decides to take the bomb away from the city, to sacrifice himself to save Gotham. But not before he slyly reveals to Jim Gordon his true identity.
A hero can be anyone, even a man doing something as simple and reassuring as putting a coat around a young boy's shoulders to let him know the world hadn't ended.
Which brings us to the end of Batman's story, as we watch the Bat fly away from Gotham, further and further from the city as the clock on the bomb slowly ticks down until...
That's detonation.
And with that, the legend of the Batman comes to a close. After being exonerated for the murder of Harvey Dent, Batman makes his final stamp on the city as its guardian, its hero, the man who saved them from imminent destruction. But it also means that the man behind the mask, the man that few knew was the one behind the mask, Bruce Wayne, was also killed in the detonation.
It is a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done. It is a far, far better rest that I go to than I have ever known.
That quote comes directly from A Tale of Two Cities, a novel by Charles Dickens, the story of which inspired a lot of this movie, from the court scenes to Bane knitting just like Madame Defarge in the novel. Even Talia al Ghul's motivations are inspired in a lot of ways from the novel. The catchphrase, "The fire rises," is even a reference to one of the book's chapters. But that is not the only piece of trivia this scene brings, because while Michael Caine is giving it his all in this moment, lamenting the passing of someone he saw as a son to him, the name he was looking at on the gravestone was not the same as the one in the final movie. To maintain the secrets of the story, the gravestone on set was instead listed with the name Miranda Tate, and to help quell any alternate theories, Christian Bale was even on set that day, in costume, both so that his name would appear on the call sheet should that have leaked, and so that any onlookers would find him at this funeral and not suspect that he was the one who was dead. But in the finished movie, Bruce Wayne Wayne is the one who is gone, leaving us with our final resolution, which packs a lot into a cross-cut montage of various sequences. It's actually a little overwhelming how much stuff is jam-packed into these final 6 minutes. We're thrust into a huge sequence of information. We've just reached the emotional climax of the entire trilogy's story, and now, in record time, this third entry ties up as much as it can before the credits roll. Bruce Wayne's will is read out, with plenty being left to Alfred, and Wayne Manor being left to the city of Gotham for the sole purpose of becoming a home for at-risk and orphan children. John Blake even gets something in the will, but something not addressed to him by the name John Blake, something addressed to his legal name.
You should use your full name. I like that name. Robin.
I guess the John Blake thing was also a cover, leaving Joseph Gordon-Levitt to essentially be this universe's Robin, though not in any way that resembles the comics. But that is merely one moment of many, as in the final minutes of the movie, Lucius Fox inquires about that blasted autopilot, wanting to know what he could have done to fix it.
Mr. Fox, it's already been fixed. Software patch. 6 months ago.
Check the ID on the patch.
Bruce Wayne.
Jim Gordon is seen on his rooftop, discovering that the destroyed bat signal from the end of The Dark Knight has been completely refurbished and repaired. By who? I don't know. John Blake follows a set of coordinates given to him in his will by Bruce Wayne, taking him into the Batcave below Wayne Manor. And all the while, Alfred takes yet another of his yearly vacations. But unlike all of his previous visits to Florence, this one came with the one thing that he had always been waiting for. Because across the room, he finally sees Bruce Wayne, joined by Selina Kyle, living his best life. Which leaves John Blake to discover the technology within the Batcave and take on an all-new mantle, be it a new version of Batman or something else entirely. Pause for effect, and... And with that, the Dark Knight trilogy comes to a close, bringing together a relatively satisfying end to the story, especially for Bruce Wayne himself. While it might not have fully justified him ending up with Selina Kyle, the entire story was about him rediscovering the will to live, and it makes total sense that the story would end with him having finally let go of the Batman mantle and off living a peaceful life away from Gotham. Critical reception to The Dark Knight Rises was incredibly positive, if not quite as positive as the reception was to The Dark Knight, but reviews were still immensely supportive, praising the characters, the effects, the sequences, and labeling it as one of the summer's best movies. The fan reception, though, was a completely different conversation. Fans were split in a big way after this movie. There were plenty of fans who loved the massive scale and the new story this movie told, but there were others who were inevitably disappointed that this didn't quite live up to The Dark Knight. A lot of their criticism stemmed from the logic gaps and perceived plot holes all across the board, and one of the most vocal criticisms was laid at the fact that there wasn't a whole lot of Batman in this movie. While Batman did have a couple key sequences, they were quite spaced out, and there were really only 3 big moments where the Caped Crusader got some big action. Given how spectacular The Dark Knight was, there was honestly no way the third one was going to live up. And there are things that definitely hold it back, from the villains to the repetitive story, and yes, even to some of the logic gaps. But at the same time, this movie kinda rules. The set pieces are massive, the action is bigger than ever, the characters are still fun, and while it's easy to make fun of Bane in a lot of ways, he is still a physically imposing villain, and it's fun to quote him all the time.
Oh, you think darkness is your ally? You merely adopted the dark. I was born in it, molded by it. I didn't see the light until I was already a man. By then it was nothing to me but blinding.
But where I think the movie is the strongest is with Bruce Wayne's arc itself. His journey to rediscovering life and his particular will to live. That's what brings everything to a close. And despite the divided fan base following the release of the movie, it still absolutely killed at the box office. Things kicked off with a spectacular opening weekend of $160 million, all before rounding out with $400 $148 million domestically and $1 billion worldwide. Overall, while the movie raked in less than The Dark Knight domestically, its strong overseas performance made this the most successful Batman movie of all time worldwide. The conclusion had been seen around the world. The Dark Knight Rises had brought the entire trilogy to a close. A trilogy that is endlessly fascinating to look back on. Not only is it a massive blockbuster enterprise about one of pop culture's most lucrative and long-lasting characters, but it's a trilogy crafted very specifically under the vision of one man. Christopher Nolan's fingerprints are all over all three of these movies. This is a director-controlled story from start to finish, and that's relatively unheard of, especially at this scale. Not only that, but there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. Regardless of flaws, this trilogy tells a complete story, the complete legend of Batman, and it does it all with the best tricks in the book, as well as all sorts of stuff that had never before been seen in comic book movies. Batman Begins popularized the idea of rebooting popular franchises, something we've seen time and time again since. The Dark Knight redefined what a comic book movie could be, and is still hailed to this day as one of the greatest movies ever made. And The Dark Knight Rises, while it didn't live up to the hype of its predecessor, is still a worthy conclusion to the trilogy, and one of the rare good third entries in a franchise, even if it's not as great as it potentially could be. Couple all of that with an absolutely fantastic marketing campaign at every turn. I mean, the creativity on all three movies, especially the viral marketing for The Dark Knight. I mean, that's just fantastic. Die-hard Batman comic fans could likely criticize all three of these movies day in and day out, specifically for their comic book inaccuracies, especially as the trilogy goes on. It's interesting to see that the first movie still maintained plenty of those iconic ideas. It was Batman through the lens of Christopher Nolan. But by the third movie, this became Christopher Nolan's Batman. A very unique iteration that almost moves beyond being a pure adaptation to just becoming another version of this character and this world in its own right. The Dark Knight trilogy is one for the history books, and I for one greatly enjoyed my visit to Gotham for this truly unique cinematic series. It was a great thrill to re-dig up the immense history of the trilogy, the marketing, the trailers, the reception at the time of release for each movie, and most especially, I greatly enjoyed taking some time to dig into why these movies function the way they do, and perhaps where some areas fall a bit short. And I hope you enjoyed this journey as well, through the highs and lows, the cheers and tears of the Dark Knight trilogy. It was one hell of a ride, which I guess means it's time to get ready for the next ride, because for my next retrospective, I think I'm gonna enroll in Greendale Community College. Let's just hope I don't step on any Dark Knight DVDs while I'm over there. Until then, however, this will be the end of this video, and I will see you guys later.